You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Matt Migaki, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. If you've ever wanted to sneak backstage and share a beer with one of your favorite musicians, well, Vox and Hops is the podcast for you. This week on the podcast, I dropped a killer episode with Kelly Schaefer of Atheist. There is this episode and over 440 other ones to help you enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. So what are you waiting for? It's time to become a Vox and Hops head. Cheers!
Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me, because there's lots of things you could be listening to right now, and you chose this one. So that means a lot. Thank you. And before we get started, I would like to talk about tonemob.com/reverb, which is a way that you can help support the show through your normal gear buying habits. You just go to tonemob.com/reverb, and that will take you directly to reverb.com, where you can do all your normal shopping, buying, selling, whatever you do on Reverb, and that will help the show out. So we get a little tiny piece of any transaction that happens if you use that link, and it helps keep the show going. It doesn't cost you anything extra. You get gear, we get a little kickback, a little wind in the sails, so to speak, and it's a win-win for everybody. So once again, that link is tonemob.com/reverb. Thank you to everyone who has used it. It's been a great thing. So thank you very, very much. I also got to tell you about Gun Street Wiring Shop. Out of Bend, Oregon, one of my favorite places on the planet. Sean is down there making custom wiring harnesses for anything you can think of. So if you got a guitar with like a million switches and a million knobs, you can maybe make those things do new things. You just got to talk to Sean. He's got custom wiring ideas that I never even considered. He's got the traditional, 50s wiring, 60s wiring, all that kind of stuff for Les Pauls and Strats and everything you can think of in the traditional sense. Or if you want to get weird, we can start throwing push-pull pots in there. We can start having all kinds of different options for you and squeeze new sounds out of your old instruments, which, let's be honest, that's pretty fun. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com to check out all the wares. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot Sean an email. He's very responsive. He's all about that customer service, and he just makes a great product and is doing great things in the industry. So I'm really glad that he's on the board with the show, and I really like what he's doing. I really think it's awesome. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check it out. And where would we be if I didn't mention the wonderful, the beautiful, the glorious Sinusoid cables out of Washington. They're like Oregon's hat, sort of, even though they're the same size. So it's a big hat. But that's not the point. The point is they are making instrument cables, patch cables, speaker cables, any kind of cables you can think of that you would need for your rig. Sinusoid has got the hookup for that. So if you go to sinusoid.com, you can check out their custom cable builder, where you can build exactly what you need. You can build the tech flex, non-tech flex. You can pick the brand of cable, the ends, everything you can imagine on a cable. You can customize in their custom cable builder and get exactly what you need, exactly the way you need it. And even better, they come with a 100-year warranty, so should anything fail in the life of that cable, they've got you covered, unless, of course, you are a member of the undead and you live to be like 800 years old. Then they probably aren't going to cover that. But for all of us regular human beings, you're never going to need another cable. Go with Sinusoid, buy it once, you'll be set, and these guys really know what's up. So check them out, sinusoid.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the tonemob.com podcast, show about guitar tone and the people behind it. I'm your host, Blake Lyland, and with me today, I have Tim Marcus of Milkman Sound. What's happening?
Not too much.
Hey. You having a good day so far? Everything going smooth? Going great?
Yeah, I showed up this morning and I turned the lights on and they were very dim, and I measured the outlets in my shop and there was 40 volts coming out of it. So it was an interesting start to the day.
Great.
Yeah, I was like, 40 volts is a little too low. Like I could work with, maybe like 100 or something, but
You just got to get one of those. What do they call it? Those brown boxes. They keep the voltage the same at all times, or at least that's what they say.
Yeah, but not that. They don't bring them that high. But anyways, yeah. So it's all good now. I guess PG&E.
No, what happened?
PG&E is just on a roll in California right now, and I guess they just blew up the transformer down the street.
That's cool. That's cool. Have you ever seen that happen? Like actually watched one blow?
Only on Twitter.
Okay, I've seen it in real life one time, and it was like the aliens are coming. We're going to be taken away. This is it. It's insane in real life, but yeah
it's exciting.
Twitter,
Electricity is fun.
It's like it's your bread and butter, right? Knowing how electricity works.
This is true.
So why don't we get right into it? And this is kind of interesting because I don't really know. I've been aware of your company and yourself for quite a while, but I don't really know what your musical backstory is and how it evolved into the company that you have today and everything that you do in the industry.
Okay. So you want to start at the very beginning, like childhood, or do we?
Oh yeah, deep.
Well, I always wanted to play guitar when I was little, and when I was 10, I started taking lessons and played in bands in high school and college, and was always kind of interested in like vintage gear. I grew up in Connecticut, and there was this really great shop called the Music Guild in Danbury, and they had like the coolest vintage stuff. And I used to work a lot, like all weekend at the dairy that my family owned, and then like take the cash and like bring it to them and buy any kind of cool stuff. So I actually had like a 412 cab that I bought there and a Ampeg V2, which I don't know if you are familiar with that. It's like it's a tube head, and it ran on these weird like 7027s and was always kind of breaking. And anyway, and then I bought like a Leslie there, and I brought that to college and got into like fixing the stuff. And in about 2004 or 5, I think I got really interested in pedal steel and started playing pedal steel. And that's when I kind of realized that everything that I loved in my guitar rig kind of was terrible for pedal steel. And I moved to San Francisco and started playing in a band. And I was using an old Silverface Twin, the ultra linear, like 135 watt Twin, which I did some modifications to, just kind of out of a book that I bought somewhere. I think what's that shop in Portland that has the technical bookstore?
I don't know. There's the most famous,
like the really big bookshop. Yeah, Powell's Books across the street. They have like a technical bookshop, and I bought a bunch of like tube amp books there. And this was a long time ago. This had to be in like 2008 or 9. And
I was going to say, anyways, I started about Portland that I don't. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I only know a few things, and everything I know there is probably long gone because I haven't been there in like at least 10 years. But where was I? Oh yeah, so I started kind of digging into that amp, and then I had a friend who wanted to build a Champ with me. So we kind of knocked that out in a couple of nights, and I got really interested in that, like a Fender Champ circuit. That's what I mean by that. And then let's see. Then I built a Tweed Deluxe kit from Mojotone, which I love and I still have. And I've since gone back and fixed all the things that I did wrong. And I kind of just really had the bug at that point. I really wanted to just build stuff. And that's when I was like, I'm just going to design an amp for pedal steel. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going to go for it. And that's what I did. And just by weird happenstance, I got an email from Greg Lees, who was on tour with Ray LaMontagne at the time, and ran into a friend of mine who was saying like, oh, I have a friend who built a steel guitar amplifier. And Greg was coming to San Francisco, and I lent it to him, and he liked it, and he wanted me to build him one. And then I built him one, and then it was not good. And he sent it back to me like, 5 or 6 times. And then by the time I was finally done, like doing all the things he wanted me to do, it was really good because he has like an incredible ear. And then I started getting like phone calls from steel guitar players. And the rest is me just trying to catch up after that.
So how much time do you spend on guitar versus pedal steel these days? Sounds like you're primarily a pedal steel player?
Yeah, I'd say probably like 75% of the time I'm playing pedal steel, and I still get to play guitar in some of the bands I play in, but not nearly as much.
So I have a deep love for pedal steel. The sound of it, I think it's one of the most beautiful sounding instruments in the world. I also am extremely intimidated by it, and I have no clue of like man, do I want to dive into that thing? Like, or will I just fail all over the place? Like, how since
Um,
you do both, how hard are we talking here?
I mean, you have to fail. You're not like you're gonna crash and burn the first couple months, but it's definitely worth it because once it starts making sense, you'll be a pedal steel player, and then you'll never run out of work ever again. That's kind of what I realized when I moved to San Francisco and I was like playing pedal steel and everybody wanted me to be in their band. I was like, how come I was like way better at guitar and no one was really knocking on my door to play guitar in their band? So like, what's going on? And I was like, oh yeah, it's because everybody's really good at guitar now, and you know, it's really like people who are good at guitar like start the band. Whereas pedal steel, everybody's like you. They're like, I'm afraid of it. But in reality, it's like not that hard and it's a really great instrument to learn. And once you get the hang of it, like you'll be busier than a bass player.
Well, maybe I don't want to do that then.
Except the
But no,
great thing
it's
is you don't actually need to learn the songs like a bass player. You don't
right.
have to
You just
know
accept. You
anything.
just have these. You just know the key and you play a part. They're like,
Yeah, it's like
here's my part that I invented.
it's like table salt. Like the band is already like this amazing meal, and you just kind of sprinkle in like a little salt on top, and everyone's like, "Ooh, that makes it even better." But if you're not there, like it's totally fine. And that
It
I was
does
like,
make it even better. It just it's so. Well, how about this? This would be a good thing for. I'm entirely doing this out of selfishness, so that I don't have to start from zero. Like, what would you suggest for somebody like me who's like super pedal steel curious? Like, where would you start? Would you start with a lap steel, or you just go full into it? Like, and
well, lap
like
steel
maybe
is
some
kind
of
of a
the.
different. It's a
Oh,
different thing. There's lots of confusion between slide guitar, lap steel, and pedal steel that I feel like I get people think I'm playing slide, and I'm like, no, slide is like you stick your finger through it, and that's like Allman Brothers or that kind of thing. And then lap steel is actually like I find it to be more difficult than pedal steel because you're in like the land of chord inversions and you have to do all these slants and stuff to get different things because you have one tuning and you're just kind of stuck with it. Whereas pedal steel, like if you want to play a minor chord, you like use your feet to change the tuning and stuff. So for me, it's like much more intuitive. But that's also just me. Like for some reason, I was able to like get into the steel pretty easily. Um, once I kind of figured out where all the basic stuff was, but that's because I took a couple lessons. So I would recommend people that are interested find a steel player locally and just see. They usually have another pedal steel that they can set up for you and set them up like face to face and see if you can grab a couple lessons and get just like the basics of it.
yeah, I feel like that's probably a smart move before like making the investment because it's not exactly like going to the store and buying $100 guitar to see if you like it. It's a
Yeah,
little more
every
involved.
pedal steel is like a boutique handmade thing that is machined out of like a gazillion pieces of aluminum and steel, and they're an insane instrument, and you can't really find a cheap one. And if you do find a cheap one, I would recommend leaving it where you found it because it's cheap for a reason.
What's the like kind of the entry level? I guess that none of it's really entry level, but like where would you suggest a guy start if he was going to start putting a pedal steel rig together?
I would, and I always recommend the same thing, which is what I did, which was advice I got from my teacher, which was there's a guy in San Diego, California named Jim Paliscar, and he has a shop called Steel Guitars of North County, and he kind of has a selection of maybe a dozen or so like rebuilt single neck 10 string steels from the 1980s that are not terribly
Okay.
expensive, probably in the like $1,200 to $1,800 range, which is pretty inexpensive for a good, like a well set up steel guitar. And the nice thing about those is like they kind of hold their value. So if you're not into it, you can kind of sell it for what you got it for. And then if you do get into it, then they're good enough to do recordings and gigging with. Whereas like the starter steels that you see like are not. They're kind of made out of really junky repurposed parts like the balls on the end of guitar strings and whatever. And they're not,
Oh,
they're always
really?
like too light. So when you move your knees for the knee levers, usually the whole steel goes along with it, which is not,
Oh no.
it's going to make it very difficult to play in tune. Whereas if you get like an 80s like BMI or, you know, MSA or something from Jim, like it'll be like a solid, totally giggable steel. I actually bought one. I bought a second one to take to Europe once, and it had Hal Rugg's signature like carved into it. And I was like, oh, there you go. It's like a collector's
Oh, yeah.
item.
There you go. That's crazy. So and then what are this is kind of interesting too. Like, do you incorporate effects into your steel at all, or do you just kind of you play it very
definitely.
traditional?
Definitely.
What do you use?
My favorite all-time standalone effect for the pedal steel as of now is the Keeley Dark Side pedal, which I think every steel guitar player should have in their seat. And
What? The dark side for real?
the Dark Side is killer for pedal steel. I don't know what magic is in that thing, but for some reason the fuzz that's in that is just like butter with pedal steel. And then it has the delay, and then you can flop it over to that Univibe if you want, and it's just like a kind of one and done pedal. And I use that a lot, and I've convinced most of my friends that play pedal steel to buy one. And you know, it's just a killer pedal. You can do all the like Sneaky Pete kind of fuzzy, you know, tape echoey stuff with that. And you know, it runs on like a regular 9-volt thing and fits in your seat and sounds great. And then
Nice.
the other pedal I use, besides a volume pedal, which is like an essential part of it, is I really like that new MXR Phase 95, which is like the little tiny, I think it's a Phase 90, a Phase 45, and a script in like one little mini pedal. And I keep that thing on Phase 90 at about 11 o'clock and all the time. That's like the Waylon Jennings machine right there.
You're talking my language right there. I'm a huge Waylon fan. So
yeah, or I think Ralph Mooney was a steel player, and
yeah, Ralph Mooney was. There's actually, and you may have already listened to this and may have maybe like whale. What did I just do there? That was weird. You might be well
for
familiar.
shorthand. You know, me and Whale,
whale. You know. But there's a podcast called Cocaine and Rhinestones, and it's all about like a 20th century country music. And there is a Ralph Mooney episode, and it is fascinating. So if you are curious,
into that,
yeah, you will probably really enjoy it. That podcast is awesome. It's one of my favorites that I've ever heard. It's so fascinating. But the Ralph Mooney episode was really cool. You'd probably be into it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm pretty sure he played Fender pedal steels too, which are pretty unique in like the pedal steel world because they don't have knee levers. They have just like a gazillion pedals for your feet, and a lot of those guys are playing with 2 feet. So
I almost feel like that would make more sense to me.
Well, when they play with 2 feet, they don't use a volume pedal, and it just makes it sound a little different. If you listen to like the stuff that the Flying Burritos were doing, I'm pretty sure that Sneaky Pete wasn't using a volume pedal either, and he was playing with 2 feet, and it's just a different thing. It's like driving with 2 feet, you know, which is supposedly a no-no, but unless you have a manual transmission. But anyways, yeah, it's just like a weird, different way of doing it, and those Fender steels have a very unique sound.
Interesting. What other than the function of it, what goes into the tone of a steel guitar? Like, I kind of, just being a dumb guitar player, I just like, aren't they all like Telecasters? Like,
no, sort of? I mean, it's the same as guitars, where there's like the bodies are built out of different things. The bridge hardware makes a big difference. Like on a pedal steel, it's called a changer. That's like the thing with all the fingers and whatever that raises and lowers the different strings when you step on the pedals. And
okay,
what the neck is made out of. Like I have two guitars from the same company, Williams, and one has a wood neck and one has an aluminum neck, and they sound completely different.
I
And
believe
then
that.
I have a couple Emmons guitars which have what's called like a push pull system. So some of the changes get like pushed by the levers and some get pulled, and that has a totally different tone than a modern pedal steel, which is all pull, which has like a split changer where some of the pulls raise and some of the pulls lower. And they all sound different. The Fender ones have like this weird like pulley in the middle of them, and like it looks like aircraft cable or something, some sort of like steel like rope that ties to the changer, and it's wacky. So yeah, they all sound different, just like guitars do. And once you get pretty like trained up, you can kind of tell what the different steel players are using. If they have like a Showbud or an Emmons, or I think Garcia was using a ZB, which is even wackier system that I don't know because I don't have one of those. And then like a lot of the modern steel stuff, like we'd hear like Paul Franklin or whatever. I think those are like that's an all pull steel, and they all sound very different. They all tune differently, and they all feel very different to the player. And the all pull steels, the modern ones, are definitely like the fastest playing steels, in my opinion.
Oh,
Or at least in
interesting.
my experience. Like you can really shred on those things if you want, because they're so fast, and like the manufacturing has come so long since the 60s. So everything's like computer, CNC cut out of aluminum and whatever. And everything's just precise and great, like a Ferrari or something. And then like the old ones from the 60s is like driving a school bus. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to get this pedal down in time. That's kind of how my Emmons push pull feels.
It's like it's kind of it's a little more raw. It's a little it's an experience instead of kind of more. You have to play it rather than it playing you. Rather, I guess.
Yeah, and then it's like the next day you're like, why is my knee killing me? You're like, oh yeah, because I brought the Emmons to the gig last night, and it's I was actually doing like physical work with one leg all night
instead of just kind of gliding into it. I gotcha. That's interesting.
Yeah. If you're gonna do like a 3-set show or something, I would recommend, or at least for me, I always bring like a modern pedal steel so that I can be comfortable, because that third set on my Emmons is really really slow. Like I don't even care if I'm playing in tune anymore. Like my left foot, like I just get so tired of mashing the pedals down, because they start feeling stiffer and stiffer. It's like the end of like a long road trip when you've been driving for like 10 hours, and you're just like, I'm not even stopping at red lights anymore. I just got to get there and pee. It's kind of that.
I gotcha. It's a lot of, that sounds like a lot of work. Maybe I don't want to get into this. No, I'm totally kidding. I want to dive off of this subject and get into your stuff a little bit more. But before we do that, I had a good question from the Facebook group from Dylan Clay, and this is a very good question, and was one I was actually going to ask. What makes an amp particularly well suited for the pedal steel?
In my experience, you want it to have a lot of what I call bandwidth. And that is that the steel guitar itself has like a crazy range of like frequency response, where like the lowest strings are kind of in like the bass guitar area, and then the highest strings and like pinch harmonic stuff is like really really super high. And then like steel guitar players do a lot of very complex like chord voicings and stuff, where like you have a chord and like a couple notes are bending in different directions, and it's just like, if their amplifier is not very hi-fi and doesn't have like a really good power supply, it'll just kind of sound like mush. And there's a thing that tube amplifiers do that guitarists love, which is like there's a ghost note sometimes where you like bend like like a Marshall, like for example, you'll like do a 2-note bend and you'll hear like that beating sound. And for steel guitar, that's not ideal because you're doing so much bending and stuff. Like you kind of gotta get that beating down, but you don't want it to be all the way gone because then it sounds really sterile, like a solid state amp or something, and that's not good either. So you kind of, for me, it's like the huge hi-fi bandwidth, like the minimal interference from the power supply, and then the third thing I would add on that would be like tons of power, as much as you can get, because again, you have to reproduce that low frequency.
I wondered about that. In my brain, obviously this is not accurate. But in my brain, steel is always. I would imagine it being a higher focused instrument, which is
there's
not
a lot of
really
mid
the case.
range.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, on a
so
10-string pedal steel, the low string is a B, which is like, the seventh fret of a guitar. That's like as
Right.
low as that goes. But I play an extended E9, which drops it down lower. And it's just different. And then, but a lot of steel guitar players play like a C neck. And on the C neck, one of the pedals drops the low C down to a A, and that's like the same as an open A on a bass guitar. So, like
okay.
I said,
Gotcha.
That's a huge range of. So yeah, you're mostly in the mid range. I would say that's the sweet spot. And then the really high pitch stuff. Some steel players play up there more than others. For me personally, I kind of hover around the, mid range stuff.
Right on. So, you kind of got started making amps for steel guitar players, and obviously that's a big focus of what you do and you yourself as a player. But you're also a guitarist, and I mainly have seen your guitar amplifiers. I mean, how would you say, like, you as a company, do you sell more guitar amplifiers? Do you sell more pedal steel focused stuff, or what?
Way more guitar amplifiers these days. The nice thing about I feel like you can kind of go like one direction, which is like guitar sounds great out of the amps that I designed for pedal steel, but it doesn't necessarily go the other direction. Like when you plug pedal steel into like an AC15, let me just say that if you ever listen to Sunvolt, I think Eric Haywood was playing pedal steel out of an AC15 on their first record. That came out like a million years ago. But anyways, besides that, it doesn't always, unless you're Eric Haywood and you're some sort of like genius of low power amplifiers, it doesn't always work very well. It just, sometimes they have that like ghost note, or sometimes they have like a very forced, like pinchy mid range, which might kind of not jive with your pedal steel. But what really sounds great is when you plug in like a Telecaster or any guitar pretty much into an amp that has that like kind of high bandwidth and like less interference from ghost noting. That sounds really great too. So that was when I first started building guitar amplifiers. I was kind of just taking the pedal steel ideology and migrating it to lower power amps that would be great for guitar. And then at some point I just started making guitar amps that I can't play pedal steel out of. So I was just like, screw it. There's so many guitar players, and pedal steel players are interesting because they'll have their one pedal steel, and then they'll have their one amp, and then they'll use that. Like a lot of these guys that they're using the same like twin that they bought in like 1968. And they're like, that's their one amp that they've had their entire career, and that's it. And guitar players are like,
it seems like, the twin is so ubiquitous with pedal steel.
Yeah,
players.
A twin with JBL speakers is like, that's what Lloyd Green used on that live Charlie Pride record, and that's become kind of like the gold standard of steel tone ever since. And a lot of those guys around that time like bought a twin with JBLs, and they've just been using it ever since. And only recently are like, this is too heavy, I want something lighter, which is a different conversation. But so anyways, there's guitar players kind of are more like, I want to have like 4 different amps because they understand that they all sound and react differently. And, there's no one amp to rule them all. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to make some more guitar oriented stuff and have different options. And that's kind of where like the, class A, like the half pint and pint amps came to be. And more recently, the one with the harmonic tremolo, which doesn't really work great with pedal steel. And I've done some other kind of guitar stuff. But for example, the Creamer is an amplifier that is just killer with pedal steel. That's like the first one where I kind of took the voicing from my big steel amp and like put it into a smaller, lower power amp. And that amp has been very good for double duty. And you'll hear that on a lot of recordings and stuff. And there's a lot of steel players that are using that as their recording amp, even though it's technically a guitar amp.
That's the one I was telling you before we started recording. That's the one that I've been kind of drooling over. Was the Creamer. I'm like,
Yeah, that's the one.
But then you dropped you dropped something on me, which I didn't expect you to say, and it's that you've been using the amp more. And for those who don't know, the amp is indeed a product that he makes, and that is the name of it. But maybe we'll let you talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, so I had an amplifier called the Half and Half that I'd been building for a few years. That was a steel guitar amplifier, and it's 300 watt, and it had basically like a twin reverb style front end, including the tube reverb. And I tried making a guitar version of it, and I was like, this is just like too much power for guitar. I was like, I really want to do like a 50 watt version of it. And then while I was at it, I was like, I wonder if we can like do it so small that it's like the size of a pedal, and then have the reverb and tremolo that my other amps have. And so that's kind of where that idea came from. I'd had like maybe 5 years or so building hybrid amplifiers the way that I thought they needed to be built, which is like with high voltage and hand wiring and whatever, and which makes a difference running the tube at like a really high voltage for headroom and stuff. So anyway, so the amp concept kind of came to be, and I think it was last year at NAMM I announced it, and they started rolling out kind of in like the late summer of last year. And right now we are completely sold out of them for another month or so. We're like building another huge pile of them because I just had this thing kind of just like took off. I really had no idea that many people were going to want like a pedal board amplifier. But yeah, so what I was telling you earlier is that I usually gig with my Creamer, and I use it for guitar and pedal steel. And lately I haven't taken the Creamer out in a long time. I've just been keeping the amp pedal on me at all times, and I have a speaker cable and like a little like coupler thing, which I think they used to call it like a knuckle, but it's like 2 female 1/4 inches like stuck together in like a little tube. And
Gotcha.
I'll just like unplug the speaker out of whatever amp is around, in any rehearsal space or other band or whatever, and just jack it into the amp pedal and do that. Or I'll bring like a little cabinet with a 112 I have a couple cabs with JBL D120s in them that I like to use. And yeah, I've just been doing that. I don't know. Like I got really used to that Creamer, and it was a little bit of a change to get used to the amp, which has kind of a different feel. But like, now that I'm used to it and I go back to the Creamer, I'm like, wow, I kind of like shot myself in the foot, because now I'm making something that is like 1/5 the price of this other thing, but it's like totally my go-to thing right now. But it's never going to be exactly the same as the Creamer, I think, in terms of like that like richness of the tone. But God, it's like really close for the price.
That's so
And
interesting.
Yeah. And I've just been waiting to do like a travel gig or something. I haven't flown anywhere in a couple of years, but it's really kind of designed for traveling musicians too, because you can plug it in at any voltage anywhere. So like if you're in the UK and they have 240 volts coming out of the wall, you can plug it in without a step down or step up or anything.
Oh, really? It's just ready to rock. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you're like
Wow.
flying around the country or whatever, or like rehearsing and like somewhere else, it's just the kind of thing that it's for me. Even if I was gigging with a Creamer, and I actually have done a gig where I used my Creamer and then I had the amp, and I was using the amp just as like a DI out to the front of house, so they didn't mic my amp. That was like the Creamer was just like the world's most like amazing monitor, on stage, basically. And then the amp was doing all the like heavy lifting, and that worked great too. And I was like I was saying, like I feel like there's always kind of like when you have it, you're always like, oh, I'm so glad I have it. You know, like maybe your rectifier tube like dies, or 12AX7 or something, and then you're like, oh well, now I have this totally good thing that I can use and like not have to like borrow the house amp, which is like some dreadful thing usually, you know.
Of course. So what are the specs on this thing again? Can you give me a refresher, and for anybody who hasn't already Googled it during this conversation, what are the
Sure.
what are the details on that little guy?
So the preamp is a 12AX7, which runs at I think about like 250 volts or so, maybe a little more. And it's got a standard like 2-knob tone stack, just treble and bass. And then there's a digital reverb circuit that kind of comes in and out of. It's not this. It doesn't like get converted to digital. It's just kind of like a little loop that goes around it, kind of like how spring reverb would be. So and that was designed by Robert Keeley, because he is like
Nice.
master of the spring reverb emulation. So it actually sounds very springy and very good. And then everything kind of cascades through this VCA tremolo circuit, which kind of is it sounds a lot like bias tremolo, like you'd have on like the older Fender amps, not the optical tremolo, like that really smooth bias thing. And then from there, it just kind of cascades into a 50-watt Class D amp module. And then there's a headphone output, and there's a balanced line output with like a little EQ-based cab sim kind of thing. And then I have a pedal output. So if you just wanted to use it going into another amp, for example, or like in the front of your pedals, as you know, you can use it as just a preamp, and then the speaker output. And it's I don't know, it's pretty small, and I think it weighs about 2.5 pounds, and they sell for about $700, and has universal power. So like I was saying before, you can, wherever you are, if you're in Japan and it's 100 volts, you can plug it in. If you're in Australia, it's 240, you can plug it in, or anywhere in between.
That's very cool. Did that get kind of birthed out of, like, I know you said you're just going to try to make it smaller, but did it become a thing like, I kind of need this and therefore I would like to make it happen? Or was it sort of just a progression of the make it smaller idea?
No, it was definitely a thing that I was like, I want this, because I do a lot of like kind of rehearsals, and I don't want to bring anything, especially with a pedal steel. It's like already, that's like a whole load from the car. So I just wanted to like something that was kind of small. And then also at the time I was flying a lot for gigs, and I was really sick of using backline rental like SIR gear, because for pedal steel it's just so bad. Like, I think I don't want to get into trouble here, but as far as like those reissue amplifiers from a major manufacturer, there's one that is good, but sometimes you get a version of that one with a weird speaker or something that's not good. And then the other thing is that you're doing great for like 45 minutes, and then they kind of start like disappearing on you, and you have to kind of keep reaching back and turning it up, and it never sounds the same. And I don't know how electronically that's possible, but it is what they do. And it's, so if you're playing for like an hour and a half, it gets frustrating. So I wanted something that I would be able to fly with, even though I haven't gone anywhere since. But there will be a day where I get to fly and take this thing again, and I'll be so much happier.
Yeah, that would be. I'd never flown with like any instruments other than like a couple pedals until recently when I brought a guitar home from NAMM, and I totally understand the like I feel like I have so much more understanding for like what a traveling musician goes through, because I was like all stressed. I was like, oh, I got to get in, and I got to be in line, and I got to make sure that my last plane that I flew on didn't have big enough overhead compartment. So hopefully this one does. And it's like a whole thing like I never really dreamed of before. And it was like, that was just me trying to get a guitar home, not trying to actually like go to a gig where someone's relying on me to be there with my stuff. And I was like, wow, this is stressful. This is a mess.
Yeah, you could show up with a box full of matchsticks and be like, "This was a guitar," you know. I
Yeah.
promise you, this was a guitar when I woke up this morning. Yeah, it's really stressful.
man.
I think they've made it a little better, but not really. I was just thinking of this time I flew down to San Diego with a friend of mine to do like some sort of benefit concert, and we missed the exit to the airport, and we looped around, and we were super late, and I had to check my 1965 Gibson. What is it? I don't know. It's a Gibson acoustic from 1965, and it's like so brittle, and it's in like a crappy like chip. It's not in a great case, basically. And I had to check it. I was like, but it was fine. It was fine. It was
Everything
Virgin
went fine?
America. They did a great job. Virgin America was like, kid gloves. But yeah, I was definitely really worried about it. But they like brought it up with the strollers after the flight, so it was like sitting there in the jetway.
Nice.
But that does not always the case. I've flown with guitars in my mono bag and had to check them, and they just come out on the that like belt thing.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine doing that with an amp with like tubes, which are essentially just light bulbs. Like that thing hits the conveyor and something slams into it, and like it's done. So the amp is something that you could have in your like carry-on.
Yeah. That's having control of your instruments while traveling is very crucial. I mean, we've all heard all the horror stories, and I seen a video like a year ago of a guy, like the bags were coming down out of the belly of the plane, and he was like putting the suitcases like on his like mobile rack thing, and he was being fairly careful with the suitcases. He was just kind of putting them there, but then like a guitar would come down. It literally, he would just take it off the conveyor and drop it from like waist height, just drop it on the ground. And there was a band that was traveling, so there was several guitars, and they were just like watching in horror as the guy's just dropping them right onto the asphalt. And I'm like, what? That's not even like that much easier, you know what I mean, than just setting, because they fell into this big pile and it was like a whole mess. I was like, that's not even really saving you any work, because now you got to like dig them out of all this pile when you go to move them, again. I don't know. It didn't make any sense. And I'm like, this is what our instruments deal with. This is what.
Yeah. And try flying with a pedal steel. I mean, a pedal steel, to get it like under 50 pounds is a challenge, so it's like, and there isn't a pedal steel waiting for you at the other end. It's not. And even if there was, like, it could be set up different. It's just, you just have to like kind of deal with it. It's not fun. So there's a lot of companies now that are making like flyable pedal steels, and God bless them, because it's way better now with a smaller flyable pedal steel than it was before.
I was gonna say, how do they get a pedal steel under 50 pounds? Because the only ones I've moved were definitely more than 50 pounds. That's for sure. They just make them out of aluminum or
under
what?
50. Yeah, well, yeah, more aluminum. My friend Ross makes like a really, really light pedal steel. Sierra Guitars is his company. They're very expensive. They're absolutely gorgeous. They sound amazing, and they pack into a case small enough that you could like carry on with you. And,
really?
Yeah. But I have one I have a Williams that doesn't have the headstock on it. It's called a keyless. And it's basically like, remember those guitars from the 80s, like Steinberger or whatever, without the headstock? Yeah, totally. It kind of looks a little like that, but the pedal steel version. And that one in its little flight case is about 48 pounds. And I've flown with it. And I actually just ship it in its little case too. Like when I did that video with Josh Scott, his like vlog episode about pedal steel, I just like shipped it to him. That's like not even worth flying it out. Just like, I don't even want to carry it. So yeah, this, I don't know. There's ways to get them around. It's never fun or inexpensive though.
Right. It's just part of the price you pay. Well, you said something really interesting about there's not going to be a pedal steel waiting for you at the other side. There is almost always a guitar. If you need to find a guitar, you can probably find something serviceable somewhere, most likely.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a guitar center in like every city, or a guitar shop or something. You'll always be safe. Like they sell like, this is actually part of the reason why I don't use like weirdo tubes in my amps. Like I kind of stick to the basics, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like you can always find a 12AX7, you can always find a 6L6 or 6V6. You're not always going to find like an EF86 or uh you know, I'm trying to think of other like a 12 DW7 or something. Like you might not find those on the other end of wherever you're going or when you're on tour. So like 12AX7s, 12 AT7, that kind of stuff. Like they're every major guitar store and Guitar Center or whatever like would have those. And there is a like a kind of paranoia that I've developed, maybe from playing pedal steel and having this issue where like, you know, when you go somewhere and something breaks, like how are you going to perform that night? So I keep it very, very boring in terms of like the tube layouts so that they can be found if they need to be.
That's the same kind of philosophy that I know that Chris Benson has too. And so you guys have kind
he's
of
all about those
proved,
JJ tubes that you can get anywhere.
Yep, he uses them in everything, and you guys have kind of proved that like you don't necessarily need to get weirdo tubes to get unique sounds, which is cool.
Yeah,
I've got this old Ampeg J12 that I can't remember what the power tubes are, but there's something really weird.
They're the 7027s. That's the same problem I had when I was in college, and my Ampeg V2, which had 7027s, died. And at the time, those tubes were out of production. Like no one was making them. I think in the early 2000s, Ruby Tubes started making them again, and they're like the only ones that make them. And then a lot of people were modifying the amps to run on 6L6, but that has a different pin out, so you got to like move all the wires around.
I think
so
this
a
one
lot of
is
those old
even
amps were.
This one might even be different than the 7027s. I can't remember because they made the J12s in a few different configurations, at least as far as my internet Googling was telling me. And I can't remember what's in mine now, but I feel like it's not those. I could be wrong. I could walk over there and
I don't know.
look at it.
I'd have to look.
But it sounds awesome. But I only play it like very, very occasionally because I'm just like, one day these are going to just be toast and I won't be able to find them.
Well, you'll be able to find them. There's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, these companies made, back in the day that tubes were being produced, I mean, they made a lot of them, and then the industry like very quickly moved to solid state, and a lot of the tube stuff just kind of ended up like warehoused, and they never go bad. They're in a vacuum, so they just kind of store well, and there's lots of people with the new old stock tube stash, and I think you'll be able to find them. But yeah, this is definitely a concern of the aging guitarist, which is like, where am I gonna, when I'm old, like where am I gonna find tubes? And I think that they'll always, because eventually they will all go away. I remember when I first, like the only time I ever talked to John Mayer, like he's like, the first thing I did when I had any money was buy just like a huge thing of tubes. It's like, that's so smart. That's exactly what I would do. Because you that's like the thing that's going to like keep you going like your whole life. You can like pass it on. That's the most important thing, more than any guitar or anything. Like guitar strings will always be made, but the tubes, they really hit their stride in the 60s, and they've just been kind of going downhill ever since.
It's actually kind of amazing to me that there's enough demand, basically from hi-fi people and guitarists, essentially. That's the only ones driving the tube industry as it is today. Like, there's only a handful of manufacturers, but it's kind of amazing that there's
but that's
still
not
demand
true,
for this.
Because recently they've started developing tubes for the space program, because someone was like, oh, if you use a transistor and it's got like a silicon conductor, and like some sort of like solar radiation or something will find its way through and knock out the silicon, and it degrades those transistors and stuff that they're using in space. But a vacuum tube is a vacuum, and it conducts through a vacuum, and so the radiation just goes right through it. So I think that they've actually been kind of looking at tubes for the space industry again, because they work so well in space since they are space versus like, something that has to conduct through silicon. So I don't know.
Wow.
How does that translate to the audio? Probably not. I think those, whatever they're developing is probably like, microscopic, like little tube type conductor thingies. But as long as they can still, they know how to like do the cathode coatings and all that stuff, like I think we're good. But I would say, just as a word of advice to people that are really into tube amps, to invest in a good set of new old stock tubes for whatever amp you love, because it makes a huge difference. And they last much longer and they're much more reliable than modern tubes. And then, through your, next 10 to 15 years will be like much more enjoyable. That's just like a random unsolicited piece of advice.
That's what we're all about. Random and unsolicited things. So let's see. I'm gonna check the Facebook group here, see if anybody else has any questions. Oh, this is an interesting one. Blake Lawson wants to know what your favorite cheese is. I'm assuming because of the dairy reference. I'm not sure why he would ask that, but we do talk about food a lot.
Well, I am kind of a foodie. I mean, I grew up in a family that owned a restaurant and a dairy bar. I think my favorite cheese is there's this place in Vermont called Shelburne Farms, and they make this like really, really good aged, like sharp cheddar that's like just outrageous. And I remember having kind of like a transcendental like cheese eating experience with that cheese. But I don't know. There's lots of good cheese out here in California. I really like, like a kind of a more available thing is like a drunken goat. That's good. And then as kind of an everyday, like keep in the house cheese, Dubliner. I love that.
Oh yeah,
cheese.
Love that cheese.
Yeah, that's like my top like grilled cheese. Or the Cabot. It used to be called the Hunter's cheddar. I think it's now just their extra sharp. I like cheddar. I guess as like a general theme. Yeah, like a sharp cheddar.
Cheddar's. I like the sharpest cheddar that I can get. That's what I'm all about. I'm a big fan.
I don't really like blue cheeses or gorgonzola or that kind of stuff. I'm not huge into that. I kind of would go like a soft cheese before that.
Okay.
That's the preference. I don't know. Not too stinky.
That's a
I don't want
answer.
Cheese that smells like my child's diaper.
Yeah, I know, but stinky
cheese
can be so delicious. I mean, for real. Just love it.
It can be good.
I don't know. I haven't ran into too many cheeses, if I'm being completely honest, that I wasn't a fan of. I can usually find something to like about just about any cheese I've ever tried. I'm not like a connoisseur or anything. But yeah, if you like cheese,
if I like order a salad, I don't get one with blue cheese or gorgonzola unless I have to.
And I do. I'm like, yeah, hook me up with that blue cheese, please. But
I would
understand how it's
with like Parmesan cheese, or the pecorino, or like soft cheese, like the I don't know. What's the one I'm thinking of? The burrata? Isn't that like soft?
I don't know what that one is. That's not familiar to me.
Or oh man, now I'm just hungry. I'm just
I'm super hungry. But food. You know how the Hulk is always angry? I'm always hungry. So it's not really a new thing for me to be like, oh yeah, it's time to eat. It's just like my state of being. It's just consuming excessive amount of calories. Like a true American.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Before we do have a kind of a food section that we got to get into, but before we do that, there's a new question kind of introduced into the podcast lately by some listeners that people really seem to be enjoying. So I will ask you, what is your favorite Boss pedal?
Ooh, besides the tuner, actually I don't love the tuner. I'm not gonna lie, it's not good for pedal steel, in my opinion. Just Throwing that out
Well,
there.
wait,
My
hold
favorite
on, hold
Boss
on.
pedal is
Wait. Why is the tuner not good for pedal steel?
I just don't think it's just the resolution of it isn't like good enough, and it's also like there's lots of like sharps and things on pedal steel that I just find it to be like not user friendly for pedal steel like it is for guitar.
Okay.
If this is a different topic, but the tuner I actually like the most for pedal steel is the Polytune, TC Electronics. I think that's just for steel. It does all the weird notes, and I have the clip-on one, and you just leave it on top of the pedal steel body, and it still works. Like you don't have to like clip it on. It's just like you could like Velcro it onto the steel, and it would just go. And that's an amazing thing. But back to the Boss thing, I think the Blues Driver is my favorite Boss pedal of all time.
The Blues Driver is great. I've seen it get a little bit of hate from certain people, and I've never really understood it because it was the first Boss pedal that I like immediately bonded with, even after I was already
Yeah,
into
me
like
too.
boutique stuff.
Yeah, it was the pedal that made me be like, why am I using these tube screamers? Because it's like I used to work at a nightclub in Vermont, and someone like left a Blues Driver there, and I'd been using tube screamers, and I was like, I'm gonna try this Blues Driver, and I was like, oh my god, this is way better. So yeah, I've had it ever since. I love that
I
pedal.
think so. Oh, the same Blues Driver.
Yeah,
Nice.
it has like some sort of like Analog
it.
Man mod. I think I don't know what the mod is on it. Oh, here it is. It is the RE-J project range
Oh,
expander.
I don't know what that is.
JRC 4558D, which is I think the op amp. Yeah, it's like the Analog Man version of the Blues Driver.
Well, of
So
course,
maybe it's not
gonna sound good then.
100% pure Boss. Maybe it's a little tweaked, but you know, when you beggars can't be choosers, I found it. So
I'd
I
say
find a lot of things in the garbage and stuff here at my shop too. Actually, that's the nice thing about like being in bands and like rehearsing at those like giant rehearsal things in cities. Like when I lived in New York, I found like some little like Casio synthesizer in the garbage that totally worked. And I found a bunch of cool stuff where my shop is here that people throw out, and it's like usually just like a wire is broken or something.
Are you in a
So
practice type space? If it's where your shop is?
that's where my shop is. I'm in like a big room, and then there's a recording studio and a bunch of rehearsal spaces.
Interesting. That's like a hot tip. Maybe I'll have to go dumpster dive in near some rehearsal spaces.
Oh yeah, all kinds of good stuff.
Oh man,
And it's always broken, but it's always the way guitar gear and music gear breaks is always very predictable because it's like, for like an amp, for example, you'd be like, okay, what is the thing you do the most on the amp that would make it break? If it's not tube amps, usually it's just the tubes, very common. But it's like, oh, it's like you plug in the jack, the 1/4-inch cable, and it's like you do that like thousands of times, and like that's what breaks usually, or like some switch that you flip like a gazillion times.
that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, where's the most wear and tear? That's probably where the failure point is, most likely.
Yep. And in a tube amp, it's like 99% of the time, it's just a tube that is broken. Sometimes the tube, when it breaks, like takes out some other components with it, but it's pretty rare. Usually, like, you just pull the bad thing out and put the good thing in, like a light bulb, and it works again. But there is some like generational divide, I think, where younger people maybe are just used to like planned obsolescence and things like not being repairable. But as far as music gear goes, like everything's actually repairable. For the most part, it's like usually it's all like pretty simple. It's designed by people that want them to last and work like forever. So more unsolicited advice. Like if you see something in a garbage can, grab it. It's probably like totally fine.
And worst case scenario, if it's not, you can put it right back in the garbage.
Yep, like, you can just.
It's not that hard.
Yeah, no one got harmed, unless it's covered in something that was the reason it was thrown out was because it's disgusting and covered in some sort of bodily something. That's a different situation.
Yeah, I feel like that's very obvious though. You're not gonna get surprised by, vomit. You'll be like, yeah, that's been puked on, so I guess it's gonna stay right there,
Yeah,
right where
and
it
this is
belongs.
a higher end facility that I'm in here too, so that is not going to happen here.
Ooh, you get the people throwing out their dumbbells.
Yeah, no, not
Oh,
that high end.
oh man. It's like, oh well, this is no good. I'm just gonna have to pitch it. Wish I knew somebody that could fix this dumbbell amplifier for me, but I guess it's just reached the end of its life.
Yeah, well, what you'll find in there is all kinds of surprising stuff that you wouldn't expect.
Oh yeah? What do you mean?
Yep. I don't know. I don't want to get into that. But, back now there's like an industry of companies that make parts for high-end guitar amplifiers. But back when he was building amplifiers, there was not. So you had to like take things out of other amplifiers and like Frankenstein them if you or Dr. Frankenstein, I should say, them if you wanted them to if you wanted to make things. So there's like, you could
Interesting.
take apart an old Dumble and you're like, oh, this is like a lot of parts from a Fender Twin. Or, oh, this is from Radio Shack because that's where people used to buy stuff in the 60s and 70s for electronics projects, and things like that. It's very surprising. It's not like you take it apart and you're like, these are hand wound custom transformers and whatever. It's like, it's a lot of like recycled stuff, which kind of adds to the lore. I think it's like, it's kind of like what was that movie with Ray Liotta where he like ends up on like a prison island and they just have all the like they've made like some sort of little like society out of like whatever junk like washed up on the shore, and there's like that guy who's like distilling alcohol. That's basically what Dumble was doing. It's just like whatever was like finding its way to him, he was like turning into some sort of like, magical thing. So anyways, that's a different conversation.
I see. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about the fact that mercury magnetics wasn't exactly around back then.
Nope.
It's a whole interesting conversation. But one thing I do need to get into here before we got to wrap this thing up, and this is a crucial question. And being as you're a foodie, I think you will appreciate it. But what kind of pizza do you like?
Um, I think my favorite pizza type is pepperoni, and it's got to be thin crust. I don't mess around with that. I mean, I grew up like 30 miles outside of New York City, and we had really good pizza where I grew up, and I go into New York and eat pizza all the time, and I don't mess around with anything except a thin crust, and my go-to would be pepperoni.
Okay, solid, very solid. Yeah, I knew you were in New York for a time, so I figured you'd definitely have an opinion on that.
Yeah, California has, or at least San Francisco, like the pizza game has improved since I've been here. I've been here like about 12 or 13 years now, and it's gotten a lot better. But they generally try to like combine pizza with a salad somehow. It's like really bizarre. On the East Coast, it's just kind of like meat, cheese, and crust, and like and sauce, and that's it. And here, the California is like very creative. Like, oh, we'll put an egg in the middle of it. Like, okay, and it's good, but it's not. It's just not what I'm used to. Like whenever I fly back home to the East Coast, like I'll just go to like any hole in the wall place and get like the greasiest looking, most congealed looking slice of pepperoni pizza, and they slide it in that big oven thing for like 3 minutes and pull it out, and you
Mm,
burn the roof of your
mm.
mouth behind your teeth, and that crust like crisps right back up, and it's just great. I got to go to New York. What am I doing? I got
Oh
to get off
man,
this call and go get a slice of
get to New
pizza.
York. Oh man,
Yeah.
I'm I'm like salivating right now. If you ever come to Portland, we have a few spots that I'll have to take you to. I think you will be pleasantly surprised. With
Okay.
the pizza game is rapidly improved around here. There's some legit East Coast style spots now. Chris will disagree with me. but I don't think he's
Yeah, he's
explored as heavily as I
from
have.
like Maine or Connecticut too, right? Isn't he from Connecticut or Maine? I don't know. He's from somewhere on the East Coast.
He's been everywhere. I can't keep track of where he actually was from. He's like, oh yeah, back when I was there, and back when I was there. I'm like, where haven't you been exactly? So I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was very adamant that there was no good pizza in Portland, at least not to the level that he was the New York stuff that you were talking about. And I found some spots. I had to do some digging, but I found some spots.
Well, I will say that the East Coast has pizza locked down, but its donut culture has been ruined by Dunkin' Donuts. And this may be something that people may just throw their phones, away when they hear this or whatever. But I am not a fan of Dunkin' Donuts. I like small, like ma and pa style donut shops, and there's tons of them in San Francisco. There's no like big donut chains, and those are like we have like good donuts here, and I know Portland has good donuts. But for some reason, the East Coast, like when I was a kid, there was like all these great donut shops, and now it's just like Dunkin' Donuts everywhere, and those donuts are awful. Like, what are people thinking? How have we let this happen as a country? Like this is a tragedy that like our donut game has just gone into the garbage bin, like a broken blues driver.
I can't even think of the last time I had Dunkin' Donuts. I really, honestly, I don't think I've probably.
That means
had
you're
Dunkin'
doing it
Donuts
right.
in 10 years, maybe. I don't
like
even.
their
I couldn't even
coffee's
tell you if it
fine,
was good.
but I mean, I went to school in Vermont, and I used to like take a bus, and like the bus would like stop, and there'd be like a bus stop, and it had like a Dunkin' Donuts, and I'd get donuts, and I'm just like, it's just like they just have the textures wrong, the flavors wrong. They kind of have this weird like oily like aftertaste that kind of lingers with you, like sometimes for days. Like if you eat a blueberry Dunkin' Donut, you will like have that taste in your mouth for like way longer than you want to. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not a fan. But then when I moved to San Francisco, there's like these kind of small family owned donut places. Usually they're called like Happy Donut or something, and they're like proper donuts. They come in a little pink box. So good.
How is San
But terrible
Francisco
coffee.
doing on the bagel game? How's that going?
It's gotten a lot better. There's a place called Wise Sons that makes kind of proper East Coast style bagels. They're not quite the same, but they're very good and they're very close. They're a little expensive. Like I feel like the bagel really took off in New York because it's such a cheap, easy like grab and go thing. Here it's kind of like a boutique, bagel experience, but they are pretty good. They got a bagel should be like crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and you shouldn't have to toast it. You should just like kind of, if it's not warm, you should kind of warm it up in an oven, and they get that right. Like the texture is right. It's just they're not like cheap street food. They're like fancier, but also it's kind of like they have to go to great lengths to make these things out here. We're like we're in like the far ends of the earth as far as bagels are concerned. When I lived in Vermont, there is Canadian style bagels or Montreal style bagels, which are totally different. And yeah, it's a different thing. They're smaller. They're made in like a wood burning or like a wood or brick oven type thing. That was like a thing in Burlington. Those bagels are actually really good, and I kind of got used to them. And so now I feel like my whole like bagel barometer is like way off. I just, I've just been away from Connecticut and New York for too long at this point. I'm out of touch.
It's time to send you back for a little bit, just for a little vacation. Maybe you can do a fly date. You can test out your amp, and then you can eat some bagels and some pizza and just recharge.
Yeah, when I fly back to New York, I usually eat my way through the city. I go to all my favorite spots. But yeah, I mean, I've grown up now. Like I have like a kid and stuff, so it's like you can't just go and like be up till 3 a.m. eating like I would like to. But when he's a little older, like guess what we're doing?
Yeah, you got to take him under your wing.
Mm-hmm. I'll be like, I need to show you the way. I need to show you like what a proper falafel is. Like a falafel is not some like yellow brown thing. It's like it's green. It should be like bright green. And pizza shouldn't be thick and shouldn't have like, kale on it. It should be like bare bones, thin, like razor thin slice. I got to teach him everything I know about street food.
What that is called it's called being a good father. That's what that's called.
Yeah, great.
Well, Tim, we've hit the 60-minute mark, and I'm starving. So, if you have anything last you'd like to tell the listeners, anything you'd like to convey, now's the time.
Thank you for listening, and check out Milkman stuff. I have a Instagram. It's at Milkman Sound. The company is actually called Milkman Sound. I think a lot of people think it's like Milkman Amplifiers or Milkman whatever, and it's Milkman Amps, but it's actually Milkman Sound. It's because I started the company. It was a sound company first. I had like a PA and like recording studio stuff, and then I like kind of got into amp building. So, anyways, that's the history.
We left that part of the story out, but
I left a lot of the story out. But I'm like Chris Benson. I feel like this is why Chris Benson and I are like such good buddies. Like we've just like done so many things, before we ended up doing this, and like it's always kind of interesting. He's kind of like he's well experienced. Like he's like, oh, I used to do that. I used to do that. Like I used to drive an ice cream truck. Like I can tick that box. I used to repair televisions. All kinds of random stuff.
We'll have to get into that maybe on another episode sometime. We'll have to have you back on.
Yeah, I'd love to.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. And I'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. So for Tim, this is Blake. And as always, folks, good luck and good tones. That episode has actually been on the books for a long time, longer than I even realized. I texted Chris Benson to get Tim's number because I knew they were friends, and I realized I already had his number in the phone, and we had been texting like in 2015 about him doing the podcast. So it kind of finally coalesced and came back around. We were able to make the episode happen, and I hope you really enjoyed it. And one last thing, if you have not checked out the special announcement episode that was just prior to this one, it was a very short, just couple minute audio description of a new thing we're doing with the podcast where we're giving away pedals. And it's not that complicated, but it involves listening to the podcast and answering some trivia questions via email. And you can get yourself some freebies once a month just by listening to the podcast. So if you want to go back and listen to that, it's just a couple minutes. It gives you the whole rundown of what's going on and what we're going to try to do moving forward with these coming months. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So go check that episode out. And until next time, keep it on the fuzzy side, would you? One last thing before we totally sign off here. I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style? Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gun Street Wiring Shop. Yes, Gun Street Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately. And if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gun Street as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gun Street harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.